Good evening, everybody. It is so good to see you as people continue to slowly get out, and we're doing the best we can to keep everybody as safe as possible as we keep pushing forward. I know everybody right now just continue to pray as far as schools and all the other things that are starting to try to push forward, and we're just praying that the numbers and everything will allow them to do everything they need to do. Tonight, I am going to deal with the last of the questions that I've had, and this is the final part of this. Just let's talk about it. We'll come back and do more of them at different times. I'll reload on 3 or 4 different questions and come back and do it. This one tonight is probably the hardest one that I will do. I have to deal with this on occasion as being a pastor. I have to deal with all the questions that comes from this. And if it wasn't so prevalent in our society and going to be more prevalent, the Bible says that in the last days, as time begins to get closer, men's hearts will fail them for the fear, the anxiety. What we see in our society now with all the uncertainty and the chaos in leadership and chaos in every aspect of our world, from every just crazy ideas that come out now, and people's like, well, that sounds okay. And so we live in a society now that is struggling, and people feel that struggle. And so what I'm going to talk about tonight is not going to be the most popular subject. It's not one I'm not probably going to get any amens, but it's one I need to deal with tonight because I have to. And it's one that I have to cover. And maybe down the road, this will be something recorded, something you can use, somebody you can help to deal with, because in your life, the rest of this process that we're going through, especially during this reopening of our society and this reopening of everything and all the setbacks that are going to come and businesses that won't make it, there are going to be a lot of discouragement. There's going to be a lot of things that are going to have to be dealt with. So tonight we're going to deal with this understanding of ending your own life. Some would call it suicide or whatever you would want to call it, but ending your own life. I don't really just like the word per se. It really doesn't give a good definition of what actually is taking place. It's someone who has decided to end. I'm going to end my own life. And so just to kind of give you an understanding, Pastor, why is this so important to talk about? Well, just to let you know that if I was talking about homicide tonight, let's talk about murders. Talk about people being murdered in Jackson or murdered in other cities. You say, Pastor, we need to do something about that. Well, let me tell you, murder is number 12 on the national. It doesn't reach suicide. People drowning. We need to have people, lifeguards and protective people. It doesn't even come close. How about drug disorders? Drugs, man, we need to stop drugs. Not even close. Not even close. The things that the news would talk about every single night will not come close to what I'm talking about tonight. What I'm going to talk about tonight is almost 1% of all deaths that will take place in America this year. That doesn't sound like a lot, but let me give you some of the understanding of this. From 1999 to 2018, the suicide rate has increased 35%. From 10% of every 100,000 per se, to 14.2. Let me give it to you in a different related way. The rate increase on average approximately 1% per year since 1999 to 2006, and has increased by 2% every year from 2006 till now. The last studies we have definite is 2018, and I'm promising you they're not crashing. They're still climbing. In 2018, the suicide rate for males was 3.7 times higher than females. Let me give it to you in this way. Suicide is the 10th leading cause of death in the whole country. In the whole country. And that doesn't seem large, but listen, of all the ages in the United States, you say, well, that's not too bad. There's a lot of things worse than that. Well, let me read. Suicide is a major contributor to premature mortality as it ranks as the second leading cause of death for people 10 to 34 years old. From 10 to 34 years old, It is the second leading cause of death. So you think it's important to talk about? Yes, it is. It's very important. There are people in this room tonight who have thought about it, maybe even gone further. We know friends of ours that we have to watch on a regular basis. We worry about, we pray about. We're constantly calling or checking on people that we think, oh man, they struggle with these thoughts, they struggle with this. So, and fourth, it's the fourth leading cause of death from ages 35 to 54. So this is what we're dealing with when we talk about this tonight. So in this way, look at it. In 2018, 48,000 people committed suicide. That's 131 per day. That is one person every 11 minutes will end their own life. One person every 11 minutes. So by the time I preach this tonight, 50 minutes, 30 minutes, however long it goes. That's how many people every 10 minutes to 11 minutes you can just about say somebody in the United States decided it isn't worth it anymore. And so experts believe the count really is twice as high as that, but a lot of times it's just labeled as basically unintentional death. We don't really know why they ran off the bridge. We don't really know why. And so really those statistics are hard because nobody can really ask the questions. Suicide, as I said, is the eighth leading cause, third among this. In recent surveys, 60% of teens thought about it. 9% have tried it at least once. One out of every 10 kids, one out of every 10 kids that you meet has thought about it or tried it. So, understanding tonight that we're just kind of putting this in a hot topic, and I'm going to answer it for the people that have asked me. I don't think there's anything more devastating or heartbreaking than this. It is nothing that disrupts families, that disrupts, there's no funeral that I ever do that's any more difficult than when this takes place. There is questions and situations and things that are hard to answer and they're hard to deal with. And we're going to dab into that tonight, and we're going to try to give you a mindset of being able to handle that question or that in your life. All right? So when we look at this, you got to understand also that in our society that is constantly pushing, why are the numbers consistently going up, Brother Lott? Because understand it, that in suicide rates are highest among divorced, separated, widowed, and lowest among married. God had a system to keep people balanced. That's why the Bible says, for this cause a man shall leave his mother and father. You stay with your mother and father. You stay in a safe setting until you find the next person, because being alone is one of the catastrophic things the enemy uses. In our society, we're always alone. We've got 1,500 friends, but we're alone. We're in a crowd of people, but we're alone. We're sitting in church, but we're alone. And so there's an understanding of why this is taking place. The disruption of all the things that's taking place and all that society is pushing on us and everything they're saying that's okay. If we are to go into to the gay society, if we were to go into all of that culture, it is 3.5 to almost 4 times higher, the suicide rate. People who are struggling with gender, struggling with all this, it doesn't make them coming out, quote, the closet does not make their life better. It has made them more suicidal. It has made them more hurting. It hasn't solved anything. So we live in a society where the generation itself doesn't have an answer, because everything that it promotes as normal and pushes and does is the very things that are creating all the problems within someone being alone. Let me read a few scriptures and we'll get started. In Exodus 20 and 13, here's what the Bible says. So how does the Bible talk about this? How does the Bible use this? In Genesis 9 or Exodus 20 and 13. Go there first. Yeah. You shall not murder. This is one of the 10 commandments. You shall not murder or kill. You cannot, that is just a prerequisite. People put them outside their businesses. You shall not murder. You shall not kill. Go to Deuteronomy 5 and 17. Deuteronomy 5 and 17. I only have a few scriptures, so I'm not going to drive them crazy. I didn't give them all this, so let them work with me. You shall not, what? God puts it in there twice. He rewrites the 10. He rewrites it and says, listen, I'm going to make this very clear. You do not murder. Go to Genesis 9 and 6. Genesis 9 and 6. Whoever sheds man's blood, by man his blood shall be shed. For in the image of God he made man. Go to Psalms 139 and 13. Psalms 139 and 13. For you formed my inward parts. You covered me in my mother's womb. You are the one who did this. You designed me. You made me. Part of the Christian identity is that every one of us in this room have already committed suicide. Look at the person beside you and say, have you committed suicide yet? The Apostle Paul makes it clear. He says, we are to die to ourselves. We are, if the only reason that can still remain an option in your life is that you still feel I'm alive and I can or I have the choice to die. One of the saving parts of my life, and understand this, I dealt with this as a young person. I know this battle. I know it really, really well. And part of going through and coming out of this is the understanding that I had to die to myself. Now don't get me wrong. I got saved when I was 8 or 9 years old. And in that relationship, I loved Jesus and He loved me. But I still wanted to do what Tim Lott wanted to do. And it wasn't until I was 18, 19 years old that I finally had that moment. And in between some of those years, the enemy fought very hard for me to make a decision about my life. And when I began to study what Paul said, Tim, you have to die to yourself. You have to quit having the right to make decisions. I use this phrase all the time with you guys. Dead people don't vote. So I'm dead. I don't have a vote. I was made by my Creator. I was formed in the womb by my Creator. In Jeremiah, he makes it very clear. I knew you when you were there. I ordained you. I gave you your gifts. I gave you your talents. I'm the one who has called you out. This is what David talks about when he talks about you formed my members. You weaved me together and put all my members together. Every one of us in here as a Christian, the first step as a Christian is that we give away the right to our lives, to our bodies, to our ideas of what we want. It is called dying to yourself. It is you die to yourself. And until you do that, the Christian walk will always be confusing. It will always be a struggle for you because you will always be debating your idea versus what God's idea is. You'll always open the Bible and wonder, well, I know God wants me to do this, but I just can't. A dead person doesn't have that option. And until there was a moment in my life where I understood these scriptures that Tim, you can't do this. You can't even give this as an option. This can't be something that you even think about. You don't have a vote in this anymore. Because listen, the Bible contains these two prohibitions about killing. But nowhere does it expressly forbid suicide. The Bible doesn't go into this mindset of, now you cannot commit suicide. It doesn't even have the word in the Bible. It doesn't use that. Why? Because the Bible takes it for granted that if you are a child of God and if you're reading this Word, then it is to build your life and you are never in the mindset of ending your life. You are from a mindset of a servant. And as a servant, you're doing what the Master says. That is consistent with what God teaches. The Word is not even mentioned. It may be because it's viewed as a sacred gift of God. Understand that life is sacred. Your life tonight and the lives of the people that you know, that is a sacred gift that God has given you. I've sat in the room with babies that came out stillborn. Believe me, life is sacred. I've been there in hospital rooms where someone is gasping for their last breath and they pass away. Life is sacred. It is an incredible gift of God. And it is not to be something that we just willfully decide, well, I'm tired of this moment. Now, in the Bible, there are 7 recorded persons, so we need to deal with what the Bible says. Being a good church, that's what we have to do, right? It's not my opinion. It's not, well, this is my opinion. No, this is the Bible. So let's look at the Bible, since it doesn't use that phrase, but it is consistently teaching about life. Then let's look at the moments that it talks about suicide. Go with me to Judges 9 and 54. The first we find is a man by the name of Abimelech. Abimelech. So you're going to get some Bible study, and we ain't just going to be talking about this the whole night. So you're going to get some Bible study. Then he called quickly to the young man, his armor-bearer, and said to him, "Draw your sword and kill me, lest men say to me, a woman killed him." So his young man thrust him through, and he died. This was the first assisted suicide. This is an assisted suicide. He is mortally wounded. He has been hurt and wounded, and he could not pull the suicide off himself. He is mortally wounded, and he says, "Listen, I don't want somebody to come to me and say, a woman killed that man." And when you talk about assisted suicide, it is one of the main thrusts of your thought process. I don't want people to see me like this. I saw a great movie years ago, and it was a great movie until the end. The whole movie was about, and I don't remember the name, watched it with my wife, and so it was about a guy who was paraplegic. He was a great athlete and became paraplegic, and the whole part was his parents hired this young lady to come and encourage him to want to live, to want to live, to want to live. Well, all through the story, he's given all these reasons to live. They fall in love, everything, all this reasons. But at the end, he still looks at her and says, and I'm going to ruin the movie, "Yeah, I'm going to do this." And it's like it takes this great movie, and at the end, there's this girl walking away smiling because he gave her some cash, and she's going to go live her life, and he's not. And I'm thinking, whoa, you have totally warped the way this would be. You think she's going to walk away smiling about that? You've lost your mind. It is the understanding that if I assist somebody or I help, in our mindset now and in our world now, we're really moving toward whether it's better to put people down who are unhealthy, or we're in this debate and have been since Dr. Kevorkian pushed it on our stage years ago. And we're still in the battle of, okay, is it all right to assist someone? Because you don't want to see them suffer, or you don't want to see them have to go through this, or they've got a disorder, or their baby's still in the womb and they've got some chromosome problems, and we don't really need that in our society, and you don't want to deal with that. So let's assist you in relieving a problem. This is the first suicide that we see. It's an assisted suicide. And number 2, go with me to Judges 16 and 30. And let's make it very clear, he was not a believer. The second one we have is Samson. Here's what it said. "And Samson said, 'Let me die with the Philistines.' And he pushed with all his might, and the temple fell on the lords of all the people who were in it. So the dead that were killed at his death were more than he had killed in his life." This is also not technically a suicide. It is an act of revenge. But many times when suicide is done, it is because of revenge. In fact, God uses Samson's anger to accomplish a great goal. The enemy uses your anger to accomplish death or hurt. Let's say you are someone who is dating someone, and the person breaks up with you. There's enormous anger. Because of that anger, I'm now going to go find the person at work. And this happens all the time. We read about it all the time and see it in news. They go to their workplace. They go to where their home is. They kill several people, kill the person, and then kill themselves. It is done not out of love or any act of love. It is done out of pure anger. The Bible says that God used Samson's anger to do good, but it still was anger. Samson was somebody that God never could totally control. He never could totally get what he wanted from Samson. It would have been great if Samson could have been a godly man fighting these battles and but Samson was not. And God says, I'm going to use your grudge against these people. So allowing them to capture him when he loses his strength, God allowing him to be blinded, God allowing him to be ridiculed, God allows the anger to build to where he finally says, God, even if it kills me, I don't care. Just let me get my revenge. And God restores his strength to allow him to win a battle that God intended to do, to free his people from the Philistines. The reason revenge for his eyes, to do what God has assigned for him to deliver Israel. Go with me to 1 Samuel 31 and 4. 1 Samuel 31 and 4. Any questions so far? As we said, this is open mic discussions when we talk, so you can raise your hand, or if I can see your hand, and don't hesitate to ask questions about stories, ask questions about, because this is a very complicated subject. It's very complicated in the fact that God doesn't just come out and just say this, because this subject is a subject of trust. It is a subject of trusting God with your life, trusting God with your future. It is not that God wants people to just be forced. It is that people would choose to trust Him. It's that people would say, I trust you, God, with my life. That is the greatest compliment that God gets. So in 1 Samuel 31 and 4, here's what it says. Then Saul said to the armor bearer, draw your sword and thrust me through with it, lest these uncircumcised men come and thrust me through and abuse me. But his armor bearer would not, for he was greatly afraid. Here again, Saul is wanting an assisted suicide because he knows if they catch me, they're going to drag me and they're going to embarrass me and they're going to kill me, but they're going to do it in such an abusive way to make a point of it. Don't give them that glory. Don't give them that honor. But his armor bearer was afraid, so here's what happened. Therefore, Saul took his sword and did what? And fell on it. This is the first suicide that we see. This is the first person that says, listen, I do not want to deal with what I'm going to have to deal. He was already wounded, but was not mortally wounded. Whether he was mortally wounded, we don't know. We just know that he was already wounded. He couldn't fight. He wasn't able to defend himself. He asked for another to assist him, so he fell on his own sword. And understand, more than anything, just like Samson, who struggled with walking with God, just like Abimelech, who didn't walk with God, Saul was out of the will of God. When these moments happen, it is not about a godly moment. This is the first thing you need to realize. These are not godly planned moments. These are not what God intended. It is the result of mixing the sin of life and the mistakes of life and the unrepentance of life with what calamity is coming on them. The armor bearer in 1 Samuel 31 and 5, go to the very next verse. And when the armor bearer saw that Saul was dead, he also fell on his sword and died with him. Two, back to back. The armor bearer, his master the king, had already committed suicide. He must have reasoned the battle is lost. I will die anyway. And he too, fearing torture and fearing what might happen and fearing that God's not going to save me, he too chose what Saul chose. You get a pattern. You're starting to get a pattern. It doesn't matter if I preach a funeral of a suicide or there is calamity mixed into it. There's no way around it. And the Bible, when it uses this in stories, it is trying to tell you, listen, look for the calamity that is going on in the midst of the story. Even if God is trying to use it for good, it's still the calamity. Whether it's Samson, we love to hear the story, it's still a tragedy of a story. It's not the way you would want it to end. Number 5, go to 2 Samuel 17 and 23. 2 Samuel 17 and 23. Now when Ahithophel, I'm going to get it right. Just give me just a second. When Ahithophel saw that his advice was not followed, he saddled a donkey, arose and went home to his house, to his city. Then he put his household in order and hanged himself and died. And he was buried in his father's tomb. Ahithophel is understanding he was once a great counselor of David. But here again, calamity. Ahithophel had chosen Absalom to follow. He decided to dump David, choose Absalom, and we know what happened to Absalom. He ended up hanging by his hair in a tree, and somebody put a spear in him and took care of that problem. But he was the counselor who had left David and decided that he was the one. He switched to Absalom after David's affair with Bathsheba. He had anger about something that he didn't like what God was doing or the way God was doing it, and he chose a different route. In doing so, he clearly foresaw the result when he saw Absalom die, and he knew himself to be doomed. This is the first suicide that we actually have of a healthy person, someone who is in their right mind, but because of the decisions that they have made, the calamity that they have brought into their life, notice the process that they do. It sounds so familiar to what takes place in our day and time now. He went home. He washed all his dishes, paid all his bills, made up his bed, got everything cleaned up, took care of all the affairs of his house, and then he hung himself. He was out of the will of God. And instead of begging, pleading, coming back, the decision was, I would rather die with my own choice. I would rather than to deal with the humiliation. Because understand now, as we said, what is the problem? When I told you I had to finally correct that flaw in me, what was the problem? My flesh still wanted to have its vote. I didn't have nothing wrong with God. Ahithophel would have had no problem going back to David if David would have put his arm around him and said, man, it's all right. We all make mistakes. But he knew there was going to be consequences. He knew there was going to be a price to pay. He knew that he probably could die if he didn't do it right, if David chose to. And instead of actually dying to what God's will was, he knew that David was supposed to be the king now. He knew that he had messed up. And instead of coming back and saying, look, I missed God's will. I messed it up. Look, I'm laying myself down. Do whatever you want to do with me. I'm sorry, David. I made a mistake. Instead, he said, no, I'll do it my way. Go to 1 Kings 16 and 18. Any questions? Still cruising along. I can see all the amens rolling off your lips. It's just wonderful. But it's biblical. It's Bible stories. We have to deal with them. Our next person is Zimri. And it happened when Zimri saw that the city was taken, that he went into the citadel of the king's house and burned the king's house down upon himself with fire and died. This man is definitely out of the will of God. He murdered the king while drunk and killed his whole family. And he himself took over the kingship. He reigned for 7 days. For a whole 7 days, he was the king. Sounds like our society today. I had my 15 minutes of fame. And for a whole 7 days, but it didn't last long. Omri led Israel to take Zerva, which was the capital. Zimri set fire to the palace and then burned himself up inside. Then someone out of the will of God. The reason for the suicide, he knew his reign was over. He would be killed and murdered, and he had no following. Here again, I don't see a future. I don't see any way I can go. It is a mindset of hopelessness. When a person is saved, that is the one thing that changes in a person's life, is the fact that you go from hopeless to hope. You go from helpless to strength. So you understand that when I'm battling, when I'm in this battle, okay, I want to believe in God, I want to follow God, but my flesh is still, it is so imperative to crucify it. Why? Because when the enemy comes at you, he's coming to kill, steal, and destroy. He cannot touch your soul, so what is he killing, stealing, and destroying? Your body, your mind, your life. If he can mess up your mind, if he can mess up your body, if he can mess up, that is what he is there to do. So, number 7, go with me to Matthew 27, 3 through 5. One of the most famous ones of all that we see. No different than the others, but just famous. And Matthew 27, 3 through 5. Then Judas, his betrayer, seeing that he had been condemned, was remorseful and brought back the 30 pieces of silver to the chief priests and elders, saying, I have sinned and betrayed innocent blood. And they said, what is it to us? You see to it. Then he threw down the pieces of silver in the temple and departed and went and hanged himself. Now I want you to notice the process of all the ones that we've seen. Let's look at this one very carefully, because this one gives us a real picture of all of these kind of wrapped into one. Go back to verse 3. Then Judas, whose betrayer? Jesus. Remember the battle. The battle is between you dying to yourself and becoming a servant of Christ, or you trying to live to yourself and still have Christ in your life. That is always the battle. And you cannot live in between these two without being tortured, tormented, confused, misled, and eventually calamity. So Judas, his betrayer, seeing that he had been... So what is Judas realizing that all the others in the past had realized? The gig is up. Notice all the ones in the past, Saul, all of them have the same problem. They finally in their flesh realized the gig is up. My flesh cannot take me any further. Now all of us in here would quickly think, well then fall on your face and ask God to forgive you. But if I'm still wanting to fight this battle, I don't want to do that. How am I going to not have to just humble myself before Christ and humiliate myself before His will and say, I surrender? How am I going to do that and still keep my flesh? Well, let's see. Seeing he had been condemned, he was remorseful and brought back the 30 pieces to the chief priests and the... So when you find yourself in the flesh, having messed up, having done, what is your way of fixing it? Well, go ahead. Yeah. Okay. I can't fix it. I can only ask forgiveness and die. But Judas he's still in the flesh, wants to fix what he has done. In my flesh, I've got to find a way in my flesh to make it right. Not that I want to become Peter, not that I want to become James or John. I don't want to sell out totally and hide out in a house with them. I just want to go back and make it right. I want to try to fix it where I can still keep these guys as my friends, and I can still keep Jesus on the payroll, and I can still, I just want to try to figure out, can't we just get along? Can you imagine the young person who breaks up with the girl or the boy? Can you imagine the young person who is sitting there thinking, how do I get it back to the way it was? How do I fix it? And you can't find a way to fix it. The marriage that's gone, the job that's gone, the drugs that have been doing for so long, you stole from so many people. There's so many ways. You've cut, you've done everything else, and you can't find it. How do I, Brother Lott, find happiness? What can I do? And the amazing thing is, there's nothing you can do to go back and fix. Saul couldn't go back, but all during that time he could have chose, David, you're supposed to be king. Take the throne. I'm going to step back. No. Samson at any time could have said, look, I'm going to quit sleeping around with these women. I'm going to get my act together. I'm going to quit drinking. I'm going to quit doing what I'm doing. I'm going to get my life right, and I'm going to be what God called me to be. No, I don't want to do that. I just want to figure out how I can have both. And when somebody is suicidal, unless there is other conditions that we'll talk about, it is a understanding that they have reached a point where in their flesh they cannot keep carrying and keep toting the facade of I have it together. The gig is up. All of us have been there. It's just when we get there, we just fell on our faces and said, Lord, I'm helpless. I'm hopeless. I'm a messed up individual. When I dealt with all of that, that was my choice. When I was young, it was a choice. You can drive into a bridge going 90 miles an hour and try to end your life. You can do whatever you want to end, or you can decide that I don't want to own my life no more. I'm going to give it to God. And let me just tell you, it was the best decision I ever made in my life. I had no idea the plans He had for me. I had no idea the doors He had for me. I had no idea all the things He wanted to do. And never would have known unless I would have committed suicide in my spiritual way. And I died to myself so that I could live to Christ. That's the battle. Judas, his betrayer, seeing that he had been condemned, was remorseful, of course. I feel bad. But what am I going to do? Well, I'm going to try to take back the 30 pieces of silver and make it right. Saying, I have sinned and betrayed innocent blood. And they said, what is that to us? See, if you could go back, if you could stand in front of the person you hurt or stand in front of the people and you looked at them then and you're thinking, if I could just get them to forgive me, if I could just get them to, it'd all be okay. They're going to point you the same direction I'm pointing you. They're going to look at you and they're going to say, what is that to us? You ever have people look at you and say, get over it? Ain't that the worst thing somebody could say to you? Look, you just need to get over that. I can't. Look, you just need to get past that. I can't. And that's what they're saying. You just need to get over with it. You just need to deal with it. And Judas has two choices. I can run back to my disciple friends. I can say, I messed up. I threw the silver back. I messed up, guys. I'm sorry. Or then he threw down the pieces of silver, next verse, in the temple and departed. And went. And his mindset is, how do I fix this? I'm just going to get rid of the problem. And he hanged himself. Of all the choices he could have made, that's the one he made. So, let's understand some myths about when we talk about taking our lives. People who usually talk about suicide or always taught about it usually don't commit suicide, right? I mean, they just joke about it and stuff. Well, really, that's wrong. Suicide happens without 80%. People would say, well, suicide just happens without warning. You just don't know it. No, 80% of people always say that, they were trying to tell us. They had mentioned it. They had spoken about it. Suicidal people are fully intent on dying. Not really. They're often just like Judas, just like others, they're in pain. And they just don't know how to deal with the pain. And that's where we as Christians come alongside. What if somebody had met Judas at that moment and said, dude, don't do this? What if Saul's armor bearer had been wise and said, listen, go out like a champion. Go out like a... What if somebody had got to Samson and said, man, you're throwing it all away while he's laying there with Delilah, and somebody pulled him aside and said, dude, do you see? In other words, listen, suicidal people are not always fully intent. They're just struggling with pain. And they're trying to figure out exactly how they're going to deal with the pain. If a person is suicidal, then they're suicidal for life. That's not true. Improvement after a suicidal crisis means the risk is over. No, it doesn't mean the risk is over, because if the enemy can always find a weakness in our life, he's going to consistently keep coming back to try to hit that same weakness. All suicidal people are really mentally ill. No, they're not. That's what makes it a confusing issue. Sometimes it's just their choice. It's just a choice in their hopelessness. They choose that this is the way I want to deal with my problem. If I don't mention suicide, they won't think about it and push them to do it. Actually, talking to them about it reduces the risk. So the reason I'm having this tonight is because hopefully there'll be somebody that you will decide we need to have a talk. We need to have a talk. Just making sure we're on the same page. Just saying, hey, let's have this conversation, because all of us have thoughts. All of us just want to make sure we're all good. Is suicidal unforgivable? Well, if you go talk to some people, you do it, it's done, you busted hell wide open. I grew up under that kind of mindset all the time. And here again, there has to be balance in the biblical perspective. Some of the people I mentioned to you are mentioned as heroes of faith. Samson is mentioned as somebody who is considered a great person of faith. God just used his anger to do the job that he needed to do. So it is a form of killing, and killing is expressly forbidden in the Bible. But we need to understand intentional and unintentional behaviors. So when we're dealing with this, the view of sin holds that once a person has been saved and his name is written in the Lamb's Book of Life, then only a willful and intentional desire to turn away from God and follow the old ways of sin can remove a person from that realm of being saved. So understanding that you don't fall from it, you don't lose it. It has to become a willful intention that I'm walking away, that I'm choosing I will not follow God. Like Judas, I even though I know it's innocent, even though I know Jesus is who he said, I still am willfully, I would rather kill myself than to humble myself and surrender. If a person saved or unsaved commits suicide in an outright act of disobedience or defiance against God, that person will be lost forever. That person will be lost. If willfully and defiantly I say, I am not going to humble, I'd rather kill myself, I'd rather than make God the reign and the rule and give my life 100% to Him. I don't want to do that. And that's what you deal with in some situations. if they knowingly, rationally, deliberately usurp the ownership of their soul away from the sovereign God and decide to deny and defy God as their last human act, they will face a godless eternity. Let me be very clear. If you're listening to me or going to listen to this one day and you just willfully decide, hey, I'm just not going to surrender to God, then just know that you will miss the eternity that God intended for you. You get to make the choice. You choose. You choose. And God's given you all the capacity to make the right choice. Those acts are rare. I want to make it very clear. Most of the time that I've dealt with and most of the people that I've had to, there are underlying conditions and situations and medications and different things. So I don't want you to think that that is prevalent. Just like I read all the ones in the Bible, there are a variety of stories and a variety of reasons and a variety of things God does. Most often a person is in an emotional state at the time of suicide and is very questionable. If a person has known Christ before they fell into this state that led to their hurting themselves, ending their own life, it is not irresponsible to say that God knows the destiny of that soul. That's why many times when I'm at funerals or having to deal with these issues, you'll hear most pastors look at them and say, look, we just don't know what that person was going through. That is the greatest hope that we can possibly have for someone, because remember now, these situations are horrible to the core. No one's winning in these situations. There are some times when I look and I say, I have no idea. And then there are times when there's people like the pastor in California, whose son struggled with it for years, was on his staff, went to several doctors, was on medication, fought it for years and years and years, had emotional or chemical, bipolar, whatever you want to call it, and one day lost the battle. I can look at that situation and I can say, only God knows that. Only God knows what struggle, what battle, what that young man went through every single day, and what chemical imbalances. Those are the best that I can do. And think about it now, that's the best I can do in any of those situations. That don't help a whole lot even if I say that. But at least in some situations, we have done, hey, we've carried them to doctors. We did everything we could. They just had a lot of emotional, maybe a lot of abuse or things that took place early in their life, things that just messed them up in such ways they really struggled with life. Only God will know those details. So, we strongly believe in the grace that applies to babes and children under the age of accountability. Mental incompetent persons as Christians who lose their rational abilities. As Christians, we have to have that hope that God knows. In fact, most, when they do research, say up to 70% of people that they do autopsies on and afterwards say that almost 70% of the people that did commit suicides, majority of them had underlying mental issues. So I want you to realize that most of the people who do, and imagine this away, and this is why it's so important to teach this, why I have to teach this, is because imagine you're a 15, 16-year-old boy or girl. Remember now, the number 2 cause of death from that age up to 35 years old is suicide. You're going through hormonal changes. You're going through physical changes, body changes. And if you have underlying issues, can you imagine why that is such a prevalent cause of death? I'm not making excuses. I'm just trying to tell you the facts. I'm trying to tell you that there are conditions. So what do we do, Pastor? Well, that's why I'm preaching this, because you need to get in that life. You need to make sure the enemy doesn't come in there and put a whole bunch of negative thoughts and a bunch of negative ideas and bad strategies for getting along in life. That's what happens in our society. Because of the isolation, because of the loneliness, because of this, it creates the perfect scenario for the enemy to nudge them toward killing, stealing, and destroying. Does that make sense? Any questions? I want to be very clear, so any questions about what I've said so far? Does that make sense? Makes sense. Okay. We believe that a life destroying behavior may not, in fact, have arisen out of the willful intention. It may not have just been a willful act, but out of the stress and pressure which encapsulated the person in a physical or moral or situation that they did not have control. That does happen. And I've been part of that. I've done counseling with people who went through that. Some I've helped lead the way, and some I have not. And it is devastating when you're looking at someone trying to explain to them they have hope. And they're Christian people, and they're 1 minute you can see the light on and they got it. And then the next week, the light's off and they don't got it. And that is a devastating feeling as a pastor. And you're like, ugh. So because I deal with it, I have maybe an understanding of this. Not that I have all the answers. As I said, the best I can do in those situations is only God knows. God knows why that happened, why that took place, why they were made in that way, why they had that struggle. So, what is not then? Right? What's not ending your own life? Well, accidental death would be considered part of this. Accidental death is where, let's say you just were mixing pills and doing things and you didn't realize the danger, didn't realize how much you were doing to your body, and then all of a sudden you killed yourself. Well, that you didn't intend to kill yourself. People do that all the time. They drink stuff and then done took something they didn't know it wasn't supposed to be drunk with, and you know, it's called unintentional death. It doesn't mean that it's good. It's still many times built out of calamity. But it just means that they didn't intentionally mean to. Second, taking someone off life support. I've been there. There's people who struggle with this. People who struggle with this because you're in a room and there's your mom or your sister or your brother, and the doctor says, do you want to continue this or do you want to end this? And I can't tell you how many times people have looked at me and said, Brother Lott, is this right? Can we? Yes. Because understand that they are not operating normally. They're only breathing artificially. They're not physically able to contain their own life or to do. You're just simply saying, I'm not going to keep pumping air into a body that the brain and the body has done said, I'm through. But many times, because we have these technologies, it makes life even tougher sometimes, doesn't it? Sometimes technology is not a good thing. Sometimes you wish people would just go and you didn't have to, but many times I have to sit in hospital rooms, I have to sit in places and sit with a family and watch them turn off those machines. And I'm going to tell you, that is like watching death all over again, and it's devastating. But don't think for a second that you have done something, because that body has already been shut down. Refusing artificial means of continuing life is not suicide. Let's say I decide that I'm going to sign papers that says, look, do not put me on arrest, do not continue my life. If I'm not breathing, if I don't have adequate brain function, please do not hook me up to a machine to keep me alive. Well, you killing yourself. No, I'm just not going to keep pushing something that God's done decide. Look, I done called your number and you keep trying to delay the days. You know, you're delaying this. And so understand that that's not either. So understand, you'd be amazed in our society how, that's killing someone. No. There's logical and We can look at different situations and say, no, that's not. And yes, that is. All right, so reason people do it. Why do they do it? Well, understanding, as we read the Bible a while ago, the first thing is to escape pain. To escape pain. And it's their way, the pain in their life, they don't want to deal with anymore. And so whether you're a child, and you can imagine as a teenager why that, in that age, I tell people from that age of 13 or 12 all the way to 20 or 30 years old, that is the most difficult seasons of anyone's life. If you've got kids in that age or you've got friends in that age, listen, stay in their lives because they can be a lot more lonely than you realize. I have 3 in that age right now. I have a 16-year-old, a 19-year-old nearly, and a 25. It is a devastating season because you're trying to adjust. You've got all of this going on, and you're dealing with life and who I am and everything. And so being in their lives is imperative. It's imperative that you do that. And it doesn't mean you're responsible. Listen to me. Don't let the enemy say, oh, if something happened to him, no, you do everything you can do. That's your job. But that person will have to make their choice. That person will have to decide their own fate. You can't force them or tell them, look, you need to trust God. You need to depend on. They will have to make their choices for life. The second one is an unconscious or conscious cry for help. We see people in the Bible that do this. But as I described Sunday, Moses, when he went through that moment of depression or stress or anxiety, and he tells God, God, just let me die. Well, Moses don't go up on the mountain and he doesn't jump off. In fact, there's one of the stories I read a while back of a pastor who committed suicide because he misinterpreted a story in the Bible. Many people do this. The story of Elijah. They'll always use the story of Elijah. Well, Elijah was suicidal. Elijah was not suicidal. Moses was not suicidal. David was not suicidal. They were depressed. They were at a point where they had to make choices. But every one of those men made the choice to trust. That's the difference. There's nothing wrong with being there, but there is something wrong with staying there. And so what they've done is they've said, well, Elijah he got himself in a cave and stayed there and did it and asked God to let him die and all this stuff. I said, I've been depressed. And there's times I've prayed, God, just let me die. Just let me go. Just let me go home. I ain't got no problem with it. Anybody ever had those moments? Some of y'all had them today. Raise your hands. Let me see. We all have those moments. But it is those moments where it's our flesh trying to rise back up and take charge again and say, let me be in control. That's when you have to say, oh, no. I died to Christ. I died to Christ. So that's why it can be reoccurring. If someone has struggled with that in the past, it can reoccur. I have to be very careful. Yes, there are moments I go back to depression, or when I say I have stress on me and I have all this, and it's like, oh. And I'm like, ugh. And I have to be very careful, Tim. Don't be thinking about no dumb stuff right now. I have to make very clear that as Paul said, I crucify my flesh weekly. Oh, well, yeah, that's right. He said daily. Yes, daily. And that's a good idea for you too. Do it every day. Don't do it weekly, monthly. Don't say, well, I ain't crucified my flesh this month. No, daily. Get up and say, no, I'm going to live by the Spirit, not by the flesh. So, it's a manipulative gesture. This is another part in our society now. It's become very prevalent. Big part of our suicidal problem is, and I'm going to say this suicide is the way to have the last word and nobody can ever argue with you. It is the greatest. Remember what I said? That it is a way to punish. It's a way to, in anger, to get revenge. Samson got revenge. Some people get revenge because they think to themselves, well, I'm going to write this letter, tell you how bad you hurt me, tell you how bad it went, tell you all this stuff, and then I'm going to end it, and you have to live with the pain of what you did to me for the rest of your life. In fact, most of the time, as I tell people, suicide is the most selfish act that a person will ever make. And that's really what it is. Remember now, it's all flesh. It's all what I want. It's the most selfish act a person can make. I'm not going to die to myself. I'm going to let myself have its way, and then y'all have to live with it. And it's very hard as families, and it's very hard as a church, or it's very hard to pick up the pieces from that because you don't get a chance to talk to them. You don't get a chance to fix it. You don't get a chance to make it. So it's a manipulative gesture to influence some people who is emotionally close. It's my way of saying, gotcha. And believe me, in our world today, in our society today, it's going to become more and more and more. Whatever they got to do to make you feel guilty or bad, or it's quick. It's quickening an inevitable death. That's why it's so appealing, like Saul of old. Hey, I'm going to die anyway. I'm fixing to die, so let me just go out. And it's taking God out of it and saying, let me just deal with it the way I want to deal with it. To punish themselves for something that they've done wrong. Maybe they feel guilty or bad because something in their past or something like Judas. Judas was punishing himself for something that he felt like I did wrong. And instead of coming to God, I do it this way. It's to follow a loved one, to do it, to try to make sure you follow them. Just like the servant of Saul, who, because his master had died, he decided, well, I guess I'll die too. You know, it's amazing how many times the second highest group of suicide are males, but it's males over 65 years old. The largest group, other than those young people, are males over 70. Why? Because they lose their wives, they lose their families, and you know what? I want to be with everybody else. I hear my dad talk all the time. He'll say, you know, Tim, all my brothers, my mom, my dad are all in heaven. And I think to myself, that has to be lonely sometimes, to not have someone to call. Spent your whole life for 70 years talking to your family, and now my dad is the last of the brothers. He's the last one. He's got one sister, and that's it. That's all there's left. And I think that has to be, that's why the Bible describes us, we're once an adult, but we're twice a child. We go back through those emotional problems when we're older. We go back through those issues because we have this season of our life where we're busy, we got life, we're doing life. We ain't got time. We ain't got time to die. We ain't even planning death. We're planning vacations. But in that earlier stage and in that later stage, we have to be very careful. So you can imagine what I have to fight against, being very transparent. I fight against, God, don't let me live long. Can you imagine? Because see, I've dealt with it once. And I realize if I live long enough, I'm going to have to deal with it again. And so my prayer is, Lord, I want to finish what I'm supposed to do and then just go. That's my goal. That's my plan. Just like Wesley said, burn it on both ends and let people come watch me burn. That's because I realize that would be another hard battle for me, to be having to deal with loneliness all over again. If Elise was to leave before I did, or my kids grown and gone on, and now here I am. And so I can understand that. Whew, you know, that's why we always tell our mates, no, I'm going to die first. No, I'm going first. Y'all do that? Why? Because neither one of us wants to be the one that's lonely and there by yourself. That's right. That's understandable. You done went through it once. You're like, look, I finally got it cured. Now you want me to go back and do it again. That's life. So, do what? We'll just all go into rapture. I like that. I'm all about us all going at one time. In the world we live in, we just might get to see it for long. Real quick. All right, so let me just end with this. Be aware of the warning signs and things you can do. So, warning signs. People who talk about death, talk about suicide, start bringing stuff up or different things. They're preoccupied with death or things. They spend a lot of time. They withdraw from friends or social activities. They lose a lot of their drive or a lot of their desire to. It's very similar to depression. You watch it as depression, and really that's kind of how it becomes. They have a recent severe loss. It could be something recent that's really set them over the edge, because you can be depressed, but it usually is something triggers the major It's something that, okay, I'm depressed, and then I lose a mate, or I'm depressed and I lose my job, or I'm depressed. And you can imagine our society right now. That's why there's such a fear among people. We got to get kids back in school. Listen to me. Remember, I told you the highest age group that has problems with this. There's a reason why these doctors are saying, listen, it's just as important. I know we're worried about the virus, but it's just as important that we get this age group back to college, or we get them back in society. Why? Because they ain't going to do good. Some of them have problems that they're not going to do good sitting by themselves for the next year and a half. So they withdraw. They have recent severe loss, experience drastic changes in their behavior. They lose interest in hobbies or work or school. They start preparing for death. If somebody comes up to you tomorrow and says, I just made out my will, and they're, they ain't really got any issues, and they just kind of just been thinking about it lately, just wanting to, yeah, okay. So they experience, they go through this, they give away prized possessions. If somebody starts coming and giving you, look, if something happens to me, I want to make sure you have this. And they're not sickly or old. You got to be like, why are you telling me this? Just keep your ears open. Does that make sense? Keep your ears open. They take unnecessary risks or reckless. They don't seem to care. They're impulsive. They lose interest in their personal appearance. They don't really take care of themselves the way they once did. They increase use of alcohol, drugs, things that if they have addictions, they become more and more stressed in that way. They express a sense of hopelessness. Be faced with a situation of humiliation or failure. Have a history of violence or hostility. And they really have been resistant to having any kind of helpers. If you've kind of mentioned to them, hey, you just been kind of sluggish lately. You need to go to the doctor and, let them run a test on you. Let them check your hormones, check your gallbladder, check your thyroid, whatever they got to check, whatever all they check, I don't know. You need to go to the doctor and let them check some stuff. And they're like, ain't nothing wrong with me. If they're very resistant to potential helpers or even talking, and so the ways you can help is, number one, be aware. Things I just told you about, be aware. Look for people. God will bring, it's amazing how when I preach things, God uses things. And so don't be surprised that since I've preached this now, God's like, now I can use them to help someone. I couldn't before, they wouldn't know what to do. And they've been like, I don't know. But now, okay, I can bring it back to their remembrance. Be involved. Get involved. Become available. Show interest and support in this person or people. Hey, we need to do something together. Hey, we need to go out and eat. We need to spend some time. Ask if he or she is thinking about suicide. I know it sounds crazy, but remember now, once you start to see some warnings, I said, look, all my feelers are going up. I'm not trying to embarrass you or anything, but you've been struggling with some thoughts. You've been struggling with maybe thinking about, and I know it's kind of an odd subject, but listen, you'll know the time and you'll know the person you may need, and just tell them, hey, if you tell you no, then I understand. It's just probably me. I ate, drunk something wrong yesterday or something. But I just got a feeling, and I'm worried about you, and you can be honest with me, because be direct, talk openly and freely about that subject. What I've shared with you before, share it. Say, look, let me tell you some stuff about this. Let me tell you, be willing to listen. Allow the expressions of feelings, accept feelings, be non-judgmental. Don't dare them to do it, for sure. Don't go, well, I dare you to do it. No, don't do that. Don't go off and do that. Don't act shocked. One of the greatest things I learned as a pastor is be ready for anything. So one of the things that will cause someone to draw back is if you start to tell them what they're going through and you're like, woo, then they're like, well, I'm just kidding. When they speak, just act like it's normal. Just like, that's cool. And that's neat. That's amazing. Don't act like it's something way foreign, because trying to open up about this is hard enough anyway. Take their threats serious. Encourage the individual to express their feelings. Never promise to keep what they're going to tell you is secret. That's the first thing somebody will want you to do. To say, look, now if I tell you, you can't tell no. Listen, I'm going to tell you I love you. I'm going to tell you if you tell me something and I know a doctor that can help or I know somebody, then we're going there. Just know I love you too much to leave you here. You know, we're not going to both be in silence. Never promise to keep it secret. Get the individual to promise not to hurt themselves. Just get them to promise. Say, look, promise me now, you're not going to hurt yourself. I know it sounds strange, but sometimes just enough to, look, I promised I wouldn't do that. Or I promised. Remove the means. When you're talking serious with somebody, you need to find out what it is they're thinking about and what it is they have in mind. A bunch of people could have been saved if somebody would have just got the gun out of the house. If they'd have just said, hey, here's what I'm thinking. Look, let me keep that thing with me. When we go hunting, you can use it. But until we go hunting and you ain't touching it, you don't need that thing around. And so you'd be amazed, pills or things that being able to make it not easily accessible. And then more important than anything you'll ever do is, of course, pray for that person, with that person. But prayers without legs will not affect this person. Because remember now, it's ebb and flows. So they've got to have interaction with you. They've got to have, and even when you do all of this, let me make very clear, I'm not promising you will fix it. Do not, even when you do all of this, this is still their journey with God. One thing you cannot make someone do is you cannot make them die to themselves and trust God. They have to finally, in their hopeless or helpless situation, they have to finally say, God, I give it all to you. And God has to be the healer. I know this because if I'd have went years ago to a doctor, they would have probably told me I was bipolar, chemical, I got all kind of problems, and they would have been right. The doctors would not have been wrong. And that would have been one option of what I could have done. It wouldn't have been anything wrong with it and not try to. But for me, what I needed to do at that time, what God was trying to grow in me, was trust in Him. So in the middle of that problem, He said, all right, Tim, you choose. And I can look at my life today and my courage and my strength and some of you look at it as boy, Pastor Lott's got faith. Let me tell you what it really is. I know how scary it is when I try to depend on me. So a lot of what you see in me is because I have to crucify my flesh every day. And I prayed 1,000,000 times, God, take it away. Just take it. And God's like, nope. I know what Paul means. I've prayed, I fasted. God, just take it away. And God's like, no, Tim, my grace and my strength is made perfect in your weakness. I need you to die and let me live through you. And so I wouldn't change a thing, because I wouldn't be who I am today if I had not had the stress. I think of what Judas could have been. I think of what Samson could have been. I think of what others, their testimony could have been if they had said, I reached this point and I just gave it all to Jesus. That's the story God wants to write. And as Christians, that's the story we help people write. Any questions? Well, I've excited everybody, and thank you. And my prayer is that this week, the person that you already maybe have in mind, that you need to check on, the person that God's going to bring into your life this week, I pray that you will be bold enough and strong enough to be their friend. Because as we live in this world and it continues to get more and more, this problem is not going to get better. God made it very clear to me, Tim, you're going to have to cut this off. And the only people that can cut it off is us. We are the ones with good news. They're not going to watch the 6 o'clock news tonight and get feeling better about themselves. They're not going to find anything in this world that's going to make them, it just makes them more angry, more depressed, and more hopeless. God said, that's why I called y'all. to share the good news. Will you pray with me? Father, thank you tonight. I hope that I have said this as well as you would have me to. I would not wish those thoughts. I would not wish that struggle on any person. I know what it feels like, but Father, I also know what can lie on the other side. That if that person listening to me right now would just, with all they have, surrender to you. If they would just, from right now, decide, I don't have no more votes. I'm not choosing that. I don't get to choose that. That's not on the table. That right now, Lord, if they would just give it all, and you just come into their life and in their heart, Lord, you have a plan. If you had a plan for Jeremiah, if you had a plan for David, if you had a plan for Paul or Peter, then God, you have a plan for them. Just like you had a plan for me. And Lord, I thank you that each day I crucify this flesh and I follow you. And I'm thankful that, Lord, no weapon formed against me will ever prosper. Thank you for that person right now that decides, Lord, you can have all of me. I am hopeless and I am helpless. And I choose right now not to act out in my flesh, but I choose to surrender my flesh so that you can live through me. I die to myself so that I can live. In Jesus' name, amen. God bless you. Go give that old devil fits.